Hey Jill, how are you?
Hi, Adnan. It's so good to see you.
Good to see you as well. Well, I'm glad we're able to connect. It seems like my common theme with a lot of people that have different time zones, we're always off somehow, and either reschedule or confusion has to happen. So I'm glad we worked it out.
Well, Mercury is in retrograde at the time of recording, so I don't know what it is when people are listening to this, but that's the excuse I've been using for the last month and a half, and I'm just going to go with that.
Okay, that works for me too. Well, today, first of all, welcome to the Ozark Mountain author series, and today's your turn to talk about your book, which is Tales from the Trance, and I'd love to hear about it. But first, I would like to ask you a little bit about your background, how everything started for you, and I figured let's start out with that.
Sure. I actually am a hypnotherapist. I'm also a psychic reader. I do past life regression therapy as well as regular hypnotherapy. And I really got interested in this in high school. I went to our high school grad night, and I can still remember this guy. It was Marshall Silver. He's kind of a famous hypnotherapist. And he went up on stage. He made all the very popular kids do some really crazy things. And I was like watching, and I'm like, I want in. I want to learn this. This is so cool, so awesome. So of course, my mother wouldn't let me go to his training program because it was in Las Vegas, and I was 18, and she wasn't about to let her kid go off to Las Vegas by themselves. But I did end up buying a video series. I learned how to be a hypnotherapist way before I was actually doing anything for money. I actually had another career. I used to be in sales, so I sold a lot of stuff. And my training in hypnotherapy helped me listen to people and what they're saying and how they're talking and how their words, the words that they're using, to help understand what was really going on with them, what the real objection is, which is very helpful in sales. Eventually, though, I did become certified, passed the exam, which I could have passed without even trying, and started seeing clients for that. And my experience was that it was just so much fun. It's so much fun. I get paid to do something just amazingly fun, and it really helps people. And I get to meet people and hear their stories. I'm kind of a connoisseur of human folly, and I love hearing people's stories. So my clients run the gamut of preachers, politicians, and prostitutes, and everybody in between. And these are people I might not necessarily meet normally, but I get to hear what their lives are like, what their challenges are, how things really are, what they're really thinking. And one of the things I loved about doing that, I have loved about doing that, is getting to understand human nature better, and understanding that at the end of the day, all of us, most all of us, want the same kinds of things. We're just not always clear, or we can't always agree on how we go about it. That's where politics comes in. I'm not going to get into that. But I will say, if you really talk to people on a core level, what you discover is that we all kind of want safety. We want our kids to be happy. We want our kids to be safe. We want to be able to afford nice things. And the conflict comes in how we go about that, or who do we really think is going to get us there. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to write this book, was because I think people in general don't get to hear the backstory about a therapy session. And I kind of wanted to lift that mystery, because I think if people in general could get to hear what I hear all day long, talking to a huge variety of people, there would be a lot less conflict, because I can sit there in my space and I have my preferences, but I can listen to somebody very, very conservative Christian and very, very liberal, and I can see where they really are meeting in the middle in a lot of ways, but we can't seem to get along on the street. And so I really wanted to write this book and let people see that we're just not that different.
So, Jill, what I wanted to ask you just real quick. So, this book came out. When did it actually come out? Was it a couple years ago, or how?
That's a great question. There's when it came out and when it was written, and it was written a long time ago, over the course of a number of years. So it came out in 2019. But as you probably know, when you're publishing a book, and many of the people listening know exactly what I'm talking about, there's a long gap between when the publisher says, yes, we'll take it, and when it actually gets printed and you have a copy of it. So it was written over the course of about 5 years. Initially, when I wrote this book, it was actually going to be a different kind of book. It was going to be about the stories of what client experiences, kind of like peeking behind the door, right? But it was also going to be, I was actually supposed to be a training manual for a hypnotherapist who wanted to create a successful hypnotherapy practice. And it was going to be, this is what happens. and this is what it's like, and this is what you should learn from it. But then when I got a couple of chapters over to my editor, she read it and she said, hey, this is really 2 books. And also you should write the story one first, because I think it's more complete, or it's more together. So that's how that happened. But it was over the course of about 5 years, and I wrote kind of 2 books at the same time.
Okay. No, the reason why I was bringing that up, it's almost seems very prophetic then, based on what you said this book is about and where we are right now. So was there during your writing process, how did that actually happen? Like, do you need, some people, they go to their special place. Some, it's always like a little a bottle and some glass of wine, and then they just get the process started. But how does that work for you?
I think for me, it was a lot of, this was really an interesting session with this really interesting client. Wow, I would love to write about that. So sometimes I would go to the coffee shop. Happens to be a coffee shop I love, happened to be near the beach. So if you find parking at that coffee shop, you wanted to walk to the beach too. So I would often take my laptop over there. And when you're reading the stories, I don't know if you noticed this, most people wouldn't, but they were only between 600 and 800 words each. So we're talking about 20, 25 minutes of writing. So we're talking about just like an average blog length. So it's easy for people to consume, and it's also easy for me to write. So I would sit there and I would write for half an hour. Maybe the next day I'd write another one. Maybe the next day I'd write another one. So it actually was a pretty easy book to write in itself. The harder part was figuring out which stories should go in there, because I've had a lot of people, and I've worked with prostitutes. I've had people who were married to more than one person at the same time. I mean, these are stories I really wanted to tell. And some of them were, I chose ones that I thought would actually help people learn something about human nature. And I left out the ones that were just salacious, but I might put some of those in there. You might find those on my blog.
And so basically, these were collections from these different hypnosis sessions that you had.
Different sessions.
Yeah.
I did change the names, obviously. I changed genders. I changed story, enough about the story so you really couldn't identify who it was. But yeah, these are what it's like to really work with clients. And I was hoping for it to be helpful for other therapists or other people who are interested in the therapy profession to know what's really like. What is it really like, right? Because you are going to work with a large variety of people in your career and in life in general. And you need to be able to sort of understand, what do those sessions look like? Who are these people? And what kinds of stories are people willing to tell when the doors are closed and no one's recording it?
And so, do you mind just going a little bit into, kind of surprising answers that you got from one person going to next, because the different lives and experiences and whatever you're getting obviously are going to be vastly different. But I'm assuming the messages after, coming out of that would be even more so.
Oh yeah, I'm just picturing one that, I'm glad you asked that question, because I just thought of one that was just really profound for me personally. I had a guy in my office. He and his girlfriend both had book sessions. They were back to back. And he came in and he said, I'm going to break up with this woman. She's not good for me. And somebody tell me more about that. And he told me, basically whining about his girlfriend's habits. I don't remember what it was. That wasn't that important. But what he did stop with, he paused and said, look, I'll be honest, I've beaten up women. I've beaten up girlfriends. And he asked me, why did these women take him back? And that was one of those, whoa, now I'm speaking for all women, but it was interesting for me, because at one point in my life, I had been with a physically abusive boyfriend, and I took him back. And I had to answer that. I had to think about that question and really pause and answer it. And I said, essentially, because we're used to it. You come from a dysfunctional family. You're used to being yelled at. You're used to being treated badly. And to some extent, even though the situation is not good, it feels comfortable and familiar, and it takes help in order to get out of it. And he explained to me that part of the reason he kept doing it was because there were never any consequences. So maybe if it was really bad and a neighbor witnessed it, they might call the police, but then the girlfriend would come and bail him out. And a lot of these women would stay with him. And he was a very physically attractive man. He's a really pretty guy. I'll just say he's a really pretty guy.
Mhm.
But I could see, and he said, oh, I never had any trouble getting women. Women were easy. They were just disposable. There was plenty of them. So, if anybody ever just complained, they would just leave and get a different one. And it was really interesting to me because there was something very healing in hearing his side of it. His side of it was that he never got any trouble for it, any real trouble. There was never any real consequences. So he just kept doing it. And I kind of got to see both sides of that challenge. And I found that was very helpful for me and very therapeutic for me personally.
So, who is it specifically? So, is it the level of I don't know if issues would be the right word to say, but the level of I guess I don't know what the word would be, but the things that bother the people that want to come to have a session, right? That so some is it that most of them are really traumatic that only then do they come in for help, or are there even levels where it's something really minor and it's just bothering them because they can't figure it out, so they come to you? What's the gamut of that range?
That's a really good question. Thank you for that. I appreciate it because I really want people to get help when they need it. Sometimes it's somebody's afraid to drive and they're realizing that their life has gotten limited because they're afraid to get in the car and drive somewhere. They won't get on the freeway. That's the more common one. They won't drive on the freeway. So they come in and I help them uncover what that block is or why they're not able to get on the freeway. And we do a very cool hypnosis process and they're feeling better. The other thing I see a lot of is anxiety, just general anxiety. And I want to tell you, whether it's me or somebody else, that is one of the easiest things, to fix with hypnotherapy, very often with just one session. But then you do get people who, women who were raped earlier on in life and they're trying to date and they feel they're scared of all men. I get people who are trying to stop using food as a way to change how they feel. I get people who are just generally scared or uncomfortable or unhappy. I've also I see a lot of clients, a lot of women who feel like they're dating the same loser over and over again, and they want to break that habit. So I get a lot of clients for those types of issues. But for things like, to answer your question about, the clinical level, I would say schizophrenics, bipolar disorder, borderline personality disorder are things that are not really appropriate for hypnotherapy, or hypnotherapy is not really appropriate to heal that. So those people go to a psychotherapist or a psychiatrist or someone who's got a PhD. those are the clients that they get to see. But
Sorry, I don't want to
just
interrupt.
anybody.
Just because I'm not too familiar, what is exactly the difference between those two?
Between
Psychotherapy and yeah.
I'm not required to have a license. I'm not licensed for anything. A psychotherapist does a lot of work with clients doing counseling, which may at first glance look like it's the same, but they have special training on how to help people manage with new tools and skills to get past some of the challenges that they're experiencing. Also, a lot of these counselors will work with couples to help with managing anger or conflict resolution. Those are other things that I don't really work with clients on. But people who have genuine mental illness should go to a psychiatrist or psychotherapist. A psychiatrist is a doctor. A psychotherapist requires a lot of, I think it's a master's degree, and depending on your state, a whole mess of hours of training. So, but a hypnotherapist doesn't have to have that kind of licensure. And there's also, as a result, there's a lot of things we can't do. Does that make
Okay.
sense?
Yes, it does. Thanks for that. So is just so do you what is your personally, what is your approach? Let's say someone to maybe recommend to them, okay, well, go to the other, the was a psychotherapist, and
Yeah, it's
maybe
like,
because of medication that might be needed, or do you feel like, okay, no, medication is not really the right way, just work this out mentally because the problem was created from that point to begin with.
well, first of all, not being a doctor, I can't even, the word medication is challenging even for me to say it.
Okay.
And it's not really for me to decide if someone needs medication. But if somebody's coming and saying, I'm on this high-powered medication drug, I want to get off of it, the getting off part, you need to talk to your doctor about that. But in terms of, client coming and saying, I want to figure out other ways of managing my stress that don't involve heavy medications, that's absolutely something I can help them with. But when it comes to, I'm on these drugs or I'm thinking about taking these drugs, personally, I've seen too many people on, particularly when it comes to anxiety medications. They take these things, they're stuck on them for the rest of their lives. They're very difficult to get off of. And sometimes we're talking about things that can very easily be dealt with just with regular talk it out therapy. But I will say that there are some people who really benefit from these medications. Sometimes it's just for a little while, sometimes it is for a long term. That's a determination to make with your medical doctor. But me personally, I
Mhm.
don't like the idea of having to take a drug. And so unless there's a real reason for it, I'm going to try everything I can not to have to do that. But if I broke my arm, I'm going to the doctor. I'm just going to say it. I'm not going to talk to somebody about how I feel about it. I'm going to the doctor.
Right, right. No, I understand. Well, thanks for clarifying. So I wanted to ask you then, in your book, the different processes. So you said, forgive me, I'm not on top of my game today, but you did say this was originally for other therapists or hypnotherapists, correct? So somebody reading a book that's not, a hypnotherapist, what is the process and what is the do you give like different steps for them? Like, okay, this is how you deal with this, or this is how you deal with that, or is it just different collections of stories that after they read them, they get the analogy, they understand what they went through, and then they can use it to apply it to them? Can you please clarify?
Yeah, I appreciate that. The book with the steps on how to handle it, that's coming out later, next year, actually. That book I did separate those two out. So this one is really just a bunch of stories. But I have them in categories, like what's it like to be overweight? What's it like to be in relationships that aren't healthy? I even have some, past life regression experiences I talk about in the book. But these really are stories intended for people to read them and get comfortable with the idea of going to a counselor, and counselors will read them because they'll be able to relate to these stories. Oh, I've seen that person. Oh, I remember that. And I also talk, oddly enough, I do talk about the times when I saw somebody, I said or did something and it turned out to not be the right approach. I call them fails. There's a whole chapter on fails and epic
Hmm.
fails. Oh my gosh, I can remember the time I had a client who was transitioning. This was before we really knew how that worked, right? We knew what we should and shouldn't say. But I was working with a client, and it was the person presenting themselves was a woman, but giant Adam's apple, very deep voice, and I went, oh, I bet this person was born a man, right? So at the end of the session, she asked me, where's the bathroom? And I pointed her to the man's bathroom, not knowing that that's not the most appropriate. And she came back and she said, hey, if somebody presents themselves as a woman, you point them to the woman's bathroom. And I said, I'm so sorry, I didn't know. Because she was really mad. And she says, well, now you know, and tell all your friends. And I did. I wrote it in the book, and I'm like, this is me telling all my friends. So, but that was one of the things I really wanted people to understand. There's things we just don't understand. And sometimes when you're working with clients, you make mistakes or assumptions, or you say the wrong thing, and that happens. And I did want people to see what that's like for us when we do it wrong.
And so, what other events or stories that really stood out to you? There was something that came in with a very either mild or traumatizing event that kind of had unintended consequences for healing.
That's a great question. I actually had one. I'm not sure if this ended up in the book or not. It might have been cut. I say that because it's been a little while since I read it too. But I had a client came in, and this was somebody who believed they'd been abducted by aliens. And every hypnotherapist does learn at least the basics of, somebody who believes they were abducted by aliens. There's a little regression technique. It's actually really similar to a past life regression. It's to help uncover repressed memories. This is a repressed memory technique. So I had them in my office, and I'm like, this is great. We'll help them understand what happened. And it turned out when I hypnotized them, got them in deep trance, they were telling me about what happened, and it wasn't an alien abduction at all. It was, in fact, something quite different. They were basically abducted and raped by a neighbor. But what was difficult for me was that when people are in trance, if you were to tell me you were raped, you're not going to give me the details. You're not going to tell me the particulars of that experience. But in deep trance, this person is just describing in graphic details, more than you would ever read even in a police report, exactly what happened. It was really hard for me to hear it too. And we did a, kind of an emotional clearing. And I'm thinking, okay, which therapist I'm going to send this to, because this really needs to go to a therapist. He came out feeling a lot better. He remembered what happened, lots of things that about his life kind of put together. And I thought, oh my God, that was really terrible for me. It was awful to hear it. And I realized that maybe I shouldn't be working with people who do for repressed memories. And then I come to discover when I started going on hypnotherapy forums that a lot of hypnotherapists have had this experience where a person comes in for an alien abduction or thinking it's an alien abduction because they see this hole in their memory. Maybe they see a bunch of light and it's not. And not to say that that doesn't happen, because I do believe that it does. But to say that it's every one of them is, I certainly can't say that. And my experience was that this particular incident wasn't that way. And the person really should have been working with a psychotherapist on a violent rape, basically. And because it also kind of affected me. So it really did change my practice and the way I handled those types of situations. And I ended up referring them from then on to a psychotherapist I knew who also did hypnotherapy. And so she could, if they uncovered something, a repressed memory that was that kind of traumatizing, then the psychotherapist would have some deeper level tools to help them heal that. So that really changed my practice.
And so, while we're on that subject, so did you ever have any clients that actually did have abductions, alien abductions, I should say?
I've had people that had already talked to somebody and remembered it, but I never did a situation where I hypnotized them and it came up. I stopped doing repressed memories in general because of that other incident, but also I found my personal experience has been that when it comes to repressed memories, it's actually better if the mind shows it to you yourself. Like if you don't go looking for it, if you let it come up on its own, like because your mind will uncover those repressed memories when you're ready to see them. And so what I discovered sort of, after 18 years of experience was that these repressed memories or things where people couldn't see something, particularly something like alien abduction, they do eventually come out, but it happens at a time in their life when they have the tools to manage it. That's been my experience, because it's almost like the mind won't let you see something you just can't handle yet. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And so, um, I guess I don't want to go ahead, and it's not exactly as you mentioned going to be covered in this book. But let's say, is there any basic tools that you can openly kind of talk about for someone to, well, maybe okay, first thing, go and seek help, right? That's number one step. But for someone who is still very much hesitant and just wants to, like, okay, I want to do this, by myself and figure out what's going on, whether it would be I'm overeating and I can't stop, or I really have this issue with being around people and I don't know how to get over that. But is there like a first step that they can then start taking on their own that will kind of help them out to take the next one and the next one and so on?
I love that. That's great. I would say, I mean, personally, I'm a voracious reader. I read a ton of books. I love self-help books. For emotional eating, I wrote a book on emotional eating called Feed Your Real Hunger. But there's lots of really good books on the emotional part of emotional eating. There's lots of really good books written by people who've been through it when you're talking about fears and phobias, anxiety, social anxiety. That's where I would start to help become more comfortable with the experience. Even reading a book on hypnotherapy yourself could be interesting, just to sort of get there. And those, that's not a lot of money. $15 as opposed to what, 100 something, $135 a session, some places more. But that's where I would start.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes, well, of course, help has a limit, but, at the same time, how willing are you to seek that help? So if something seems to be like maybe more, difficult financially to attain, but you have a feeling it will really, really help, then how important is it to you?
Exactly. I mean, I understand. Like I've said, if I broke my arm, I'm not going to read a book on it. I'm going to go to a doctor, and it doesn't really matter how
Right,
much it costs at that point, right?
right, right.
But there's things, people prioritize different things, right? So for me personally, mental health and the ability to get past my emotional blocks, which cost me money, emotional blocks cost you money, that is way more important than a brand new bag or, 3 pairs of shoes, whatever your thing is. That's more important to me. It may not be more important to somebody else, but it's more important to me. So it's a matter of where you put your priorities. If we're talking about the difference of going to a hypnotherapist and being able to fix your car, go fix your car, and wait till the other is available. There are quite a few apps now with meditations, hypnosis meditations, or things like that. I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but there's quite a few of these little meditations on YouTube that you can try that can be helpful. It's not geared to you specifically. When I have a client, I use their words. I figure out if they're visual, auditory, kinesthetic, or gustatory, and I use a lot more words based on what they say. And we also work on more core issues. But if I didn't have that available to me, I would go to YouTube or other forums and find just great little hypnosis meditations. You'd be surprised at how helpful that can be.
So I have two questions because mainly I don't want to ask one and not cover the other because I feel like we need to have that balance. So I'm just going to ask them both, and if you need me to repeat it again, just let me know. Obviously, one is was there ever an event or somebody that really went through something heartbreaking and it was just so difficult to deal with? And then of course the other one, was there ever, something that, made somebody extremely happy by, working through what they were working through, or something else that happened that either got their life better or maybe just seemed like, oh, this is going to be great, and then it took a left turn. If
No, I
that
love
makes
that.
sense.
It does make sense. So what comes to mind, first of all, is a client I worked for. I worked in an area, my office is in Encinitas, California, in an area where I worked with a lot of members of the Jewish community. And there's a heaviness about them. These descendants of Holocaust survivors really have a tough time with anxiety. They have a tough time with emotional eating. And there's just a heaviness about those sessions, even though they personally didn't experience it. They've got stories. And I will tell you, there's been a few of those where at the end of the session, especially when it comes to emotional eating, I mean, I can just recall one in particular where the woman was trying to stop overstuffing herself. And the habit had come from a grandmother who had survived a Holocaust camp. And she would make this beautiful food. And for her, food was love and safety and security. And she was putting that on her granddaughter. And her granddaughter was taking on this habit of using food as safety, security, and love. And it wasn't providing that. It was actually making her really sick and overweight. I do recall like listening to these stories, there was a heaviness about it. And it just, I remember between clients, going in a closet and crying. I mean, that was hard. And I did hear a lot of those, particularly working with the Jewish community, which I've loved working with those people. They're beautiful stories, but they can be really hard to hear. There's just a heaviness, particularly with the general anxiety. Whenever I see somebody who has a lot of general anxiety disorder is what it's called, when I see that a lot, I will often ask them if they're an ethnic Jew, which means somebody not necessarily religion, but somebody who has a background, genetic, because I feel like there may be something, and I'm not a doctor, there may be something in the DNA that's being passed down from generation to generation, because I see a lot of clients with severe anxiety, and the ones that just don't seem to get better easily, oftentimes those are people with Jewish ancestry. Now, client that got better and was really super happy. I can remember this guy too. He was a plumber and he had a money block. His money block was he remembered thinking he could would actually able to tell me the number. So anytime he would bid on jobs and it was over, I think it was $5,000. I think anything over $5,000, and he would always underbid it to try and keep it under 5,000. And what was happening was he wouldn't bid on really big jobs because he would lose money, because he would always underbid. And it was a big problem for him. It was a big block to money. When you have emotional blocks about money, it interferes with your ability to receive it. And it was holding him back, and it was costing his family money, and it was keeping his employees from being able to get big bonuses. There was a whole cascade of issues around this money. And when I talked to him, he said, he had an issue with certain dollar amounts. It was 1,500, but also 5,000. So we had to do some emotional clearing on getting past the idea that $1,500 was just a lot of money. Because when he was a kid, his dad would say that a lot. If the car repair was over $1,500, which is like nothing on most many cars these days, right? Oh,
Right.
that's just a crazy amount of money. We can't spend that. And so he had that in his head. He would hear his dad's voice. That's just a crazy amount of money. We can't spend that. And he would project it onto his clients. A client needs whole new plumbing on a house. Now, I'm not a contractor, so I don't know how much that costs, but I'm assuming it's more than $1,500, right? He would underbid it, or he would just not even bid on it at all because, that's just way too much money. They're never going to spend it. But you and I both know that if the plumbing goes bad on your house, it costs thousands of dollars, it makes $1,500 look like nothing, right? So a lot of people wouldn't think that was a lot of money at all, but we had to work on clearing those blocks to the money. And as soon as we did that, right away, he got a huge job. He bid on it, put the right price on it, and got it. And just, I think he said he made like a $50,000 profit. I mean, it's just a crazy amount of money. And it was just like 1 or 2 sessions. It was no big deal. I loved it. It was awesome. I love that story.
Right. Well, the reason why I was asking that, and you've already given other examples, just, to give those watching that might not know, just the vast variety of all kinds of things that, one must have patience, listening and, doing whatever, got to be done to get through whatever the process is. So basically to show it's not an easy process, especially if if you really want to help somebody,
I will say that one of the things that the challenging thing for me occasionally is when I have clients that my morals and my values and my personal belief clash significantly with theirs. Most of the time I can hear stories without judgment. I mean, believe me, I have clients who have a little harem of women going on who don't know that they're part of a harem. But occasionally I will hear things where I'm sitting in judgment and that's not my job. And I'm going, I can't believe he did that. I can't believe he did that to his wife. I can't believe they would have done that. And I'm just thinking of one client in particular who actually bugged his wife's car. I didn't know you could do this. Apparently it wasn't that hard. He borrowed his wife's car to go get a quote oil change, and they put a listening device in it because he thought she was cheating on him. And what she was actually doing was she would drive the car around and she would vent. She complain about life, right? She would vent and then she would come home and she'd be happy again. It was fine. That's what she would do. That was her thing. We've all had things like that, right? But what she didn't know was that she was being spied on. And he didn't like some of the things he heard. And that was tough for me because I just wanted to, why would you do that? I just wanted to shake him. Oh my God, I couldn't believe it. But he couldn't unhear the things that she had said. Well, she vented in the car. I mean, we don't necessarily mean what we say when we're yelling at traffic. It's just she needed to have an outlet, and it really upset him. But I will say that there's been a few times when I've had clients who've done things that were morally very objectionable that have been hard for me to hear, where I have to set my own values and beliefs aside. But for the most part, as time goes on, you do learn to be more neutral about it. And I am kind of fascinated with some of the things that people do and the ways that they justify their behaviors. But one of the challenges is that occasionally you will get something where you just, oh my goodness, I don't like this guy at all. Please leave.
So
You
was
know?
this venting like just to herself in the
Yeah, in
vehicle
the
or
car. She was
actually
in
on
the
the
car by
phone?
herself. She'd go get a
Oh,
Slurpee.
okay.
That was her thing. She would go get a Slurpee,
Oh.
drive around, and oh, I can't believe he did that. He didn't put the
Oh, I
dishes away.
see.
And
Okay.
he would do, we've all done that, right? But we think that nobody's listening. It's okay. And then she would come home and everything would be fine. She had her moment. She let it out, right? Some people would journal it. That's what I would do. But if you thought somebody was going to read your journal, you might not do that.
Right. Well, I don't know. This could be just a person to person difference and how somebody approaches the thing. If I knew that, I would be more grateful that, okay, if I love my wife, to know that there's an issue that she might not be able to come to me, about that. That would, for me personally, that would be great because then we have something we can talk about. And be like, hey, let's talk, and come together, But yeah, to then continue the judging, So it wasn't cheating, but she still did something I don't like.
Well, and the worst part was that he was eavesdropping in her car without
Yeah,
her knowing.
right. Of
That
course.
was
And
just
there's that
that
part.
was terrible. You would never do that, and I know you wouldn't do that. That's terrible.
Nope. Well, my wife just
You would be
tells me to
so
my
dead.
face.
You would be so dead.
Yep. Yeah. No, that's one thing I'm very happy about. There's whatever, it always happens in the moment. If there's something she needs to tell me, she'll turn around, let me know. We talk about it and then that's it. If it needs longer talking, then so be it. But we try not to have things unresolved because it's always that stuff that just lingers around, that like why, just
Yeah,
are
I
you
love it. That's
together
a healthy
because you love it?
relationship.
Yeah. Well, I mean, because we're together because we love each other, not so that we
Yeah.
can endure each other,
Right.
Yeah, it's like 20 years later, it's like, you know what? I really don't like you.
Oh, but there's this big prize at the end if you didn't get divorced, right?
Yeah, right.
Sorry, I don't buy that. Other people
Right.
listening might, but I don't believe that God would say, "Don't get divorced from someone you can't stand because I need you to stay married." That's really important to me. I'm sorry, I
Right,
just don't think that's. I don't think that's
right.
true.
Well, just but talking about divorce, it was very interesting. So, I'm talking about Bosnia from 30 years ago.
Mm,
So,
uh-huh.
a lot of things. I mean, believe me, a lot of things change in 30 years. So, if
Hmm.
there's some Bosnians around it, they're hearing this and they're like, "No, he's totally wrong." Just keep in mind, I have very outdated information, but growing up, at least from age 0 to 8, it was very clear how Bosnians do things. And one thing was always, you as wife, it's like it doesn't matter if the husband says this, that's what you do and follow, right?
Hmm.
And if they're wrong, you do that and follow, right? And so that was kind of the cultural thing to where divorce was unheard of. So when the war broke out and a lot of people fled to all these different nations, particularly in St. Louis, Missouri, they have a large Bosnian community,
I didn't
and
know
there's
that.
about a 50% divorce rate. Why? Because they finally realized I don't have to stay with these. Sorry.
I love that
So,
word. Are you kidding me?
right,
Yeah.
right. And so anyway, we'll see. I'll have to see if I have to edit this out with my boss. But anyway, maybe she'll understand. But no, what I was just gonna say is, but it worked out that way because now you don't have these long relationships that do not work, and just two people unhappy from the day they got married until the day they died, just so that the culture is not in, what's the word, kind of tarnished in some way, you know, because
I will
there's a
say,
lot of things that were just taboo and always kind of pushed under.
one thing I think most people don't realize, and this is something I believe I talked about in the book, but I've had a ton of clients who said that they wish their parents had gotten divorced. I've had plenty of people who said, I stayed together because of the kids. But then I have the kids grow up and come to me for sessions about relationship issues. And I've had them say, I wish my parents had gotten divorced because they can't stand each other. They hated each other. I watched that my whole childhood. That was horrible to watch. I can only imagine if my mom had gotten divorced from that D bag and married somebody else, how much better my life would have been. I'm always bothered by this troubling belief that the kids are better off if the parents don't get divorced. Because I hear the opposite from these people when they grow up. I hear, I wish they'd gotten divorced. I don't know why they put themselves through that. They don't like hearing we stayed together for you kids, because the kids would be saying, don't put that on us. We didn't want that. We didn't want to see married to someone and miserable. Why would we want that? So it's interesting to see from both perspectives, to see the kids say, I just wish they hadn't stayed together, quote, for the kids, when the kids would be screaming, imagine wouldn't it be nice to have a stepdad that I really love? Wouldn't it be cool to have a stepmom who could treat me with love and respect or teach me about something neat? I mean, a lot of these people ended up way better off when their parents got divorced and the parents remarried into a happier situation. So I totally agree with you.
Well,
100%.
especially if they know that that was an option. Because me growing up, it's like to know that parents are broken up. It's like what? Like what kind of outlandish Martian thing is this? But at the same time, it always reminds me of like secondhand smoking because people don't realize all that argument and the discord in the family has effect on these children that now gonna have to, for example, come to you so many years later
Totally.
looking for help and saying, hey, I have difficulties because of this and that. And so I don't know, I guess we all live and learn.
I mean, I can't imagine a little girl watching a dad treat mom with disrespect. This little girl is a sponge for that. She's seeing that mom's putting up with it. She's seeing that dad's a bully and a jerk. And then she gets it in her head that that's how men are. So the first boyfriend she has that treats her like a bully and a jerk, she may feel pretty comfortable with that because that's what it was like at her house. She knows that.
Hmm.
Even though on a conscious level she might say, well, that's wrong, I want a guy that treats me with love, she didn't see that in her household, so she doesn't have an example of that. The only example she has on TV, and those aren't real, and we all know that's kind of contrived anyway. But also you've got the reverse is true. The boy sees dad bullying mom, being disrespectful, being mean, and he thinks that's how he's supposed to be as a parent and as a father and as a husband. He's absorbing that behavior and he's modeling it, mirroring it with his own spouse or his own partner, his own children. And now you see a cycle of violence or disrespect or all of those unhealthy things continuing into generation after generation without without stop until somebody goes to therapy and learns that they should behave differently with their spouse and treat everybody
Mhm.
with love and kindness, until something intervenes or someone intervenes. And often the intervening is, somebody have to go to jail because they beat somebody up and they got hurt. I mean, that kind of thing. When there's an intervening, then you've got a pattern. In hypnotherapy, it's called pattern interrupt. You've got a pattern interrupt of this ugly cycle, and now something can change. But I agree with you. If the parents were doing this in the household, the kids are absolutely seeing it, and they will bring that into the next generation. That doesn't help anybody.
Well, Jill, thank you very much for today. And I basically just want to leave it up to you for your last thoughts on the book and whatever else you would like to talk about.
I would love everyone to buy the book. It's great. It's really good. It took me forever to
Of
read it
course.
or write it. It'll be certainly, you can read it in a weekend, and it took me a lot longer than that to buy it, to read it. I'm sorry, to write it. See, all of those words. You got to use all of those.
Right.
Uh, the stories are short. They will give somebody insight, and I love for people to understand what therapy sessions are really like, so that it's not so scary, so they're not afraid to be honest. Most of us who do this profession, with exception of the few examples I gave you, most of us, manage to do this without judgment. There's a lot of love there. It feels a little bit more like a confessional when you're telling these stories and there's somebody to talk to. A therapy session is really, for a lot of people, actually I would say a lot of clients I see book these sessions because it's the only time a conversation gets to be entirely about them. You have a conversation with your girlfriends, your boyfriends. It's a two-way conversation, right? But if you're having a conversation in a therapeutic session, the conversation gets to be entirely about you, and you get to get some tools so you can learn how to heal what's working and what's not working in your life. So I really hope for everyone to not be afraid to seek help. I will say hypnotherapy, is private. It's a private conversation. We have HIPAA just like every other mental health practitioner, so you can say whatever you want to and not worry about it. And I wish for that for anyone who's seeking help, because it's readily available, and you're important and you're loved and you matter, and that's really what's important. Make sense?
It does. Well, thank you very much for
Good.
that. And of course, I'm going to have all your links in the description below this video, so it'll be real easy. You just click on the link and go where it's at, because the book is available in audiobook, ebook, and print. So, and they're on different sites on Amazon and everywhere else. So I'll have all those links there. Well, Jill, thanks again. I'm glad we're able to do this today, and maybe in the future we'll do this again sometime.
Yes, my pleasure. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, you take care.